The rise of Africa, the continent, the diaspora, and BRICS explores the relationships that are affecting the global economy right now. This book explores the relationships of the African diaspora's influence on the African continent and why this is important in stabilizing relationships with an understanding of how BRICS impacts the future, good or bad. You can order your copy of The Rise of Africa today on Amazon.com.
Neo-diplomacy is the new currency. Neo-diplomacy is the new currency. The reason that I can say that is you have a couple of different factors occurring right now as we speak on the world stage. The dollar is being disrupted. Nations are no longer wanting to engage with the United States. But the third factor that affects each and every one of us is that there is a diaspora from the African continent that's willing and able to engage our brothers and sisters on the continent.
Well, shalom, salama, siyemi, shalom. Greetings to all my Israelite brothers and sisters from around the world, whether you're the bloodline of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the house of Israel, or you're a Gentile grafted into the house under the blood of Yahushua HaMashiach. I welcome you all this morning. I am back in Tampa from recent travels to New York. Shout out to my New York brothers and sisters on out there. I'm going to tell you, I was in the heart of Harlem. And, you know, last week when I was getting this trip together, I don't know that much about New York. When my cousin had came back and said, Karis, you might as well just stay in the city. I said, yeah, but I could commute, you know, a couple times into the city. I had no idea what I was talking about. To get out to where they lived in Eastern Long Island, to get over to Harlem, that was a $250 round trip. The flight didn't even cost that much. And I had to think about what that truly meant because understand, I was in New York with the military. I spent about 2 days. I had to go to an exercise. And I was 20 years old. This is this is right off of September 11th. And that was the charges for Uber. I know the taxis would have been ridiculous. Yeah, I know. I know. And one of the things was, time versus funds. And it's yeah, it is the tourist price. And I was recognizing that. Because if you're getting around the city, you are literally you're going to be walking a lot of places, subway, things of that nature. Yeah, and I understand, but I also understand this. Um, safety is a big concern. It is. It's safety and security. It's a big concern. Now, me visiting my family, that wasn't the goal there. They were just in the area. But I said, nah, let me hold on to 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 my own funds. And I just called them and say, hey, look, I tried to visit, but this is not gonna happen. And my family, they understood because they also understood what it took to get around the city. And obviously, that was something that I did not truly understand because I'm not a New Yorker. Let me rephrase that. I am not a Manhattanite. I'm not a um I live in Brooklyn or Queens on the island. Yeah, now if I was a New Yorker, okay, I get it, I get it. But again, I didn't have much time. Yeah, the Manhattanite, because there are a lot of things that I needed to do with different things. What I did get a chance to do, I went downtown to Grand Central Station and took the walk over to Times Square. And honestly, as I looked at those buildings, the only thing I could think in my spirit was this: they built their kingdom on our wealth. They built this with the glasses, the building, the skyscrapers, on the blood of our ancestors. And I had to recognize that this was the perfected kingdom of the enemy. So when people see, and it's really funny when people talk about the Antichrist system, oh, the rise of the Antichrist, and I'm like, we're living in the Antichrist system. This is the Babylonian system. We're living in it. And if you don't understand the reason I say that, you don't see that many black folks down there. No. Not like what you do in Harlem and other parts of New York or the area, the metro. Now you have the black folks guarding the many different banks that are there. But then something interesting happened. I said, you know what? Let me just walk. And I walked. And I realized this, what the Most High is doing, this kingdom is crumbling. Because as the kingdom crumbles, that is literally truly how we're able to come out of this judgment. Because the reality is that our curse was built on the design of all the glitz and the glamour. You can have access to something like this. You can work towards something like this. You can build and achieve towards something like this. But at the end of the day, as our people have realized, just by not taking up the mantle to protest, they're now afraid and they're now scared that their system, that their plans, that their strategy that has been employed against us for hundreds of years is now in real trouble. See, as I was flying to and fro, when I flew in on Thursday evening. And the effects for travel hadn't yet been established. Friday evening, I get a text. Your flight has been delayed 75 minutes. My flight had been affected. It did not get canceled. Thank the Most High. But Tampa's a relatively major market on, I would say, not necessarily the eastern seaboard, but here in the south. But I did notice a lot of the gates, especially going into JFK, they were empty as I'm getting ready to leave. Yeah, even at 6 in the morning, they're empty. That's not how that happens. Not at JFK. And so, really, I began to realize they're cutting the travel because they're cutting off what this awakening has been able to do for us. You know, when you're traveling for this system, that's fine. Okay, you're traveling for this system, no problem. You get rewarded by this system to keep up the system. You get awarded in captivity to support captivity. That's why a lot of these folks, when they had sold out, they sold out hard. And now you still have a lot of our people. It's still the same sellout game and situation. And I'm going to tell you this: that is at the ages of 40 and above. I'm going to tell you, I believe that our youth and young adults between the ages of, I'm going to say 18 to about 36, 37. I think between 37 to 40 is still kind of a gray area. They're the ones that actually see this system collapsing. The problem that they've had, though, is that as they see the system collapsing, they're not wanting to do anything productive. They'll do things productive to make a dollar, to go to work. But in terms of actually understanding a long term goal, as I've noticed, they really don't have a long term goal. Their goals are very much just my opinion. I could be wrong. It's almost a stagnant and complacency because it's really, well, for them, they see everything crashing, but they may have some friends that are obviously not of an Israelite origin, and their friends are going to tell them, well, you know what? This is just a little hiccup. And in this hiccup, guess what? We're going to jump right back on the horse. And it's going to be as though nothing has happened. The problem is that terminology, that thought process, just in my opinion, has died. And it's died really with us as a people. We don't support that. By and large, our people are seeing, okay, it's going to get bad, but how do I get out of the way? How do we move out the way? How do we get up on out of here? Our people now have made plans. This is why you now have this system coming through to limit travel. See, the double edged sword is this: Safe and sound isn't really safe and sound for them. The Most High has given us safety and security. However, each and every day that this shutdown passes, we're now in day 40. The intentional design is to make sure that you are seeing a people that is being driven into compliance. I had a discussion yesterday, and I said, a lot of people had thought negatively about UBI and the systems of government control and everything else, especially in our community, and I get it. Once you take that step towards UBI, the next step is you're just wearing the mark of the beast. You're wearing that mark because you have to be wholly authenticated. You're going to have that brain chip or, some sort of transhumanism integration because that is your ultimate authentication. And if somebody tries to authenticate you wrong, then guess what? That's almost the same as committing murder because of how the integration is. You are a self moving, self walking, self listening, self observing surveillance apparatus of the state. Don't believe me? They've they elaborated on that. They tried to give you a little bit of a sci-fi dulling of the senses when they gave you movies like Logan's Run and Total Recall and things of that nature. You had the crystal in Logan's Run and the new Total Recall. You had the phone integrated into the hand. Surveillance state. And in that discussion, I said, well, think about this. Who would now be the most accepting of that universal basic income and the mandates that it would take to be within that universal basic income? Now think about this, because when you had the lollipop, I was there 2020, and they were literally rolling the carts around to people in the office. You want to take the jab? You want to take the thing? I said no. And you know what? I knew that that was a test. I knew what was at stake. I knew what was on the line. I knew how that would eventually affect my livelihood, and it did. But in that test, in that moment, it was just a simple reaction. Nope, I'm good. Thanks. And then they try to have a rebuttal. Well, Captain Copeland, so far it's safe. I said, yeah, so far. I said, but the problem is they don't even have the actual clinical trials and studies. Have you seen them? Because they're not publishing it. I said, so for my peace of mind, I'm not going to do it. And then a couple of weeks later, this was under the Biden administration. Then they had the mandate that if the troops didn't get the lollipop, then they would be forced out of the military. I did not wait on that mandate because the very next day, when they did pull around that cart and they were giving folks the lollipop, in my spirit, all I could say was, man, these folks literally just accepted death. And what it was that they made death really convenient. Man, it's easy. It's easy to succumb. And now you have people dropping left and right. The whole thing about planning, I guess if I were a great planner, I should have become a mortician and had owned a funeral home. That is pretty morbid, isn't it? Well, that's the trend because remember, in those years later, you had a lot of people succumbing to the side effects, and then I want to tell you those side effects. It wasn't the quote unquote pandemic that was dangerous, in my opinion. It was the response to that quote unquote pandemic that, to me, was worse than the cough itself. But what it did was it provided the hype that was needed to then drive people to that goal. Just like what you're seeing here. Hey, we know that we won't be able to open up the government because once we open up the government, our debt is going to balloon to about 45, 50, 60 million dollars. Who knows? Nobody was buying our bonds. Our bonds control our money flow. Our money flow is now in problems. Because why? Because people are now taking the money and they're doing projects outside of the United States. And none of that None of those projects, for the most part, they know that it's not going to come back to the U.S. Because when it comes back after it goes out, the value to where you think you have, cut that in half. Man, I made $5 million. I made $15 million. No, 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 no. You may have made it, but in order to access that, your purchasing power is only 7.5 million. What happened to my 15 million? Access to the USD happened. So, do you think that people are going to be utilizing this dollar in droves? Or are they going to use their dollar outside the US and purchase goods and services outside the USD? You better believe they're purchasing their goods and their services outside the USD. That's just business 101. Cheaper goods, cheaper resources, cheaper substitutes. Now these countries have provided a cheaper substitute vis-a-vis or outside of the US dollar. And now you've had to have a drastic change. When I saw what was going on in July, August, I knew that they were going to shut this government down. Matter of fact, they were already telegraphing that they were going to shut this government down back in April. And now, as this thing goes down, as I was walking on Times Square the other day, or walking through it, everything is a play, everything is a performance, everything is to catch the eye of the people to keep them mesmerized. Why, while they don't see what's happening outside of their purview. Nobody told us that. Everything is good. I don't believe everything is good. No, I can't. I can't see that. I can't justify it. I was told. Right. That's what they like to say. I was told. Who told you? Well, they told me. Who's they? See, they're gonna get told by the same people that are literally leading them to slaughter. To me, just my opinion, when this war kicks off, because it's inevitable, we already knew that this was coming. They'll let's start throwing around some rhetoric here in another probably couple of days as people are getting mad about Thanksgiving. Trump will have to direct and deflect, and that deflection will now come through So we'll see all this political hyping up. We'll see what will go on in these next couple of days. I think what they'll do is they want to get the people. I'm going to say this. I believe, this is my personal opinion, I believe what they're getting ready to do in this shutdown was for a mobilization. Now, again, if they do open up the government, what they're going to get, what they're poisoning themselves to do is they're poisoning themselves to deal with hyperinflation. And it's real simple. They could say, well, that's because the government was shut down. And then each party will blame one another. So you'll have these scenarios of dysfunction. If they don't shut it, or if they don't come to an agreement and it's still shut down, you still have issues. I still believe this. I still believe that they'll have a couple more weeks of, you know, well, this is going to happen, that's going to happen, this to enable the National Guard to be in place by January 1st. I believe what we'll see is, every week, if this doesn't go through, it'll be another weekly. You take a shot, and then the on Monday you start to cry. Then on Tuesday it's not feeling that bad, and then on Thursday, Friday it's down to normal. Then on the weekend you take another shot. I think this is a cycle. No, we got lawmakers doing this. We got lawmakers doing that. So that's just part of my thought process. Not saying it's going to work. I'm just saying. But it'll be real interesting if they can't come to a negotiation and then they have, well, all of the government employees, it's an IOU. All the government employees, IOU. You'll have the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. All government employees take this voucher. Authenticate this voucher with your government ID at these participating stores, and then we'll expand. Take this voucher to your bank. Take this voucher for your mortgage, for your rent, for your car note, for your insurance. Let them know the government is going to take care of it. To me, I feel that this is going to be your start of the UBI. Oh, look what happened with the government employees. Can we expand that? Sure. And guess what? We'll make sure that you start on this road to the mark of the beast. Now, keep in mind, understand, family, that's not our portion. That is not our portion. That is theirs. But what we'll see a certain type and shadow of the real judgment to come. So, as I had stated earlier, look, them food benefits aren't coming back. Shout out to Hebrew Projections the other day. They had some pretty good analysis. DJ and Brandy. We're going to start to see a lot of people what they don't want to have happen. You can't have people give up on faith. So every other day you're going to hear something, you're going to see something. They're going to they're going to claim this, they're going to claim that, and then, well, it didn't work, it didn't come through, it didn't pass through. Why is that? I don't know. You start getting these stories coming through here and there. But we'll see how this starts to and continues to play on out. As you now have every trick and distraction under the sun taking place, simply as a means to continue to distract. And that distraction is very real. And because it's so real, don't get into arguments with our family, with our brothers and sisters. Pray for them. Truly, pray for them. Because the reality is this, they're not understanding what's happening. And they may not ever truly understand what's happening before it's too late. Because when it gets to that final hour, What are they going to say? What are they going to do? All I know is they're not going to find any fault in Judah. That blame is not going to be anywhere near us. So, family, please continue to be of good cheer. Please continue to be of good courage. And yeah, Mac, you're absolutely correct. Food benefit was used to stabilize farms prices. Yeah, for the farmers. Now, understand a lot of America also makes money on tourism. So if you're now shutting down the tourism, that's going to have an issue. I mean, look, in Florida, Florida survives on tourism dollars. You'll have flights going to Miami, Tampa, Orlando, and Jacksonville. But what that's going to cause is those minor cities to then not be able to have those type of feeder flights into those regional hubs. So then people won't want to drive the 2.5 hours to get to the airport, or in some cases, 3.5 hours. So they may not plan to travel at all. I remember back in the day taking these little small flights to like Greenville, South Carolina, or Columbia, South Carolina. Those little seat by seat row planes, those little regional flights. I think that those regional flights are now gone. So people are going to be forced to have those 4.5 hour drives. Excuse me, to an Atlanta or to a Charlotte. So yeah, these are some very, very interesting times to say the least. Oh yeah, no, listen, we've been turned our back on farmers. Yeah, they turned their back. So the farmers, it's not necessarily turned their back on farmers. The farmers have contracted at higher prices to move food. Yeah, they were puddle jumpers. Sorry, I'm let me digress. So the farmers, um, they have contracted to move food outside the United States. Remember when Trump was talking about the beef from Argentina and how the cattle folks, they felt betrayed? Well, because it's this, America sells more at higher prices outside of the United States to these other countries. So therefore, if your main market is not the actual place in where you live, you now have a disruption or a disruptor of resources, i.e., you then become generationally poorer because that's really the same model that most African countries have dealt with. They're now on the same model that these African nations have operated on. It's not the fact that Africa's poor or Africa doesn't have the resources to feed its people. That's a lie. Africa has more than enough food, probably enough food to feed the whole world. But now, what you have is the countries and these governments that have basically forced the farmers to sell their crops at higher prices than what their people can afford. Well, guess what you're going to do? You're going to sell your crops and sell most of your crops. So, therefore, when the people are trying to utilize those crops, well, there's nothing there. Or they're only getting a percentage of that harvest because most of the harvest had to go overseas. That's how you make a nation poor. That's how you get a country poorer. All of these things that had happened to other countries is now literally happening to the United States as we speak. Well, you want produce? Well, produce has got to go high. Why? Because all these other countries are are paying higher prices for it. Dang, that's a lot. Yes, it is. But these countries, what they're doing is they're paying the higher prices, but then as they release those prices to their people, their government eat a portion of the cost of those goods, i.e., the government's taking off 20, 30, 40% of the original cost. So as it goes to their populations, to their groups, guess what ends up happening? It starts to cost less. So then if it costs less, guess what's going to end up happening? They're going to consume more. It's actually a pretty brilliant tax model because it then creates more economic vitality. And then you then start to renegotiate with these farmers, and then you tell these farmers, hey, we have the biggest production in the world. If you want to continue, we need another price reduction and another price reduction. So pretty soon it's not even about the prices anymore. Pretty soon it's just about the volume. And therefore you've already done priced out Americans out of the game. So then you get to that point to where, well, the produce isn't actually as costly, but it's not about the cost, it's about the volume. You sell more overseas, you produce more, so you're selling more. I.e., the supply of that nation then dwindles, and then people and have famine. An economic strategy built on greed. And guess what they did? They did the same thing that they did to these African nations, and they turned it right back on them. Talk about a masterclass. Exits is near. I haven't seen the commercials, but if you find them, I would definitely love to check that out. All right. Well, family, I gotta start going this morning. I got some places to be. Thank you for your prayers and your support. There's a lot of stuff has happened over the weekend. There's a lot of things getting ready to happen. That's how the Most High has allowed things to kind of move and work. So thank you, family, for your prayers. There's a couple things. There's another. There's a big stronghold that we need to pray through. There's a principality that we got to pray through. It's crazy, but I believe that that was always going to be the case. For this major door to open, that spiritual warfare had to be present. With that being said, family, I do have to go because I actually do have to make some phone calls and go. Thank you for your. Can you all hear me? There you go. Please continue to support the efforts at QTUA. We're working on a lot of different things in the background, especially when it comes to relief. So I was able to contact a major contact in an extra governmental organization. So we're working on those partnership requirements that he was asking for. And as I told that person, I said, I am working my hardest because I don't want to delay. There's also some things going on in the background within a lot of these ministry partners and groups here. So keep us up in prayer with that one as we will show, these plans. Because, the moment that we show these plans, I'm telling you, the moment that the enemy literally wars against all of us, they don't want this thing to happen. They're not trying to see this thing happen. And that thing is our people coming together and truly asking the Most High to forgive us and to help us. So that is what we are living through. So, with that said, family, again, Most High willing, I'll be back on tomorrow. Hopefully, I'll be a little bit more rested up and ready to go. So with that said, family, shalom, salama, siyemi, salawam, peace and blessings, Yasharel.